Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a special Saturday edition of the Watchman Newscast. Obviously, we are not coming to you from our usual Watchman set, just coming to you from my phone, as a matter of fact, because I wanted to give you a breaking update on all the latest news in the war. And yes, it is a war between Israel and Hamas terrorists in Gaza. The Middle East never sleeps, and we want to be your one-stop shop for all things Middle East for such a time as this. So let's get into it right now. It is almost midnight in Israel, which means it's 5 p.m. Eastern time here in the States where I live. And at that midnight hour, Hamas is now saying that it is going to fire a new barrage, a fresh round of rockets at Tel Aviv and central Israel. They fired one this morning as well. We'll get into it in a minute. Over 2,300 rockets overall launched from Gaza into Israeli cities since Monday. 5 days of jihad and carnage is what we have seen. Let's get you up to speed on the big events that unfolded today, Saturday, May 15th. You've probably seen this by now if you are following this conflict and following news out of the Middle East. The Israeli Air Force bombed and toppled a high-rise, about 12 stories, high-rise building in Gaza that was used by Hamas as an intelligence gathering center, also a military command and control center. But the other wrinkle to it is that media outlets also used this high rise, this tower that Israel took out in an airstrike. The Associated Press and Al Jazeera were among the press outlets based in this building in Gaza, again, sharing space with Hamas. Knowingly, I would assume, sharing space with Hamas. Now, the outrage and the condemnation has been swift by media outlets around the world condemning Israel for this strike. A few things to keep in mind. Number one, the Israel Defense Forces gave at least 1 hour's notice to everyone inside of this building to get out. Israel has done this for years. It's called roof knocking, they call it, where they will drop a non-lethal bomb on a building just as a warning, a bomb with no huge impact, just to warn people, hey, we're coming in. They will drop leaflets. They will call cell phones. They will text people inside this building to give plenty of advance heads up. We're coming in. Get out. You are innocent civilians. You're journalists. We do not want to harm you, but please evacuate this building. So the Israel Defense Forces gave at least 1 hour's heads up notice to the Associated Press and Al Jazeera and the other media outlets in there. They left the building, they got their gear, they evacuated, and then and only then did the Israeli Air Force bomb this building, not because there were journalists inside previously, but because it was a Hamas command and control center, most likely helping to engineer this barrage of rockets that continues as I speak. So that's one thing to keep in mind as the Associated Press is outraged and releasing condemnations of Israel, among others. The other thing, not only to keep in mind, but to ask, and I don't hear anyone really asking this, including the Biden administration, by the way. Jen Psaki, the White House spokeswoman, came out and said, look, we made a call to Israel telling them the security of journalists is paramount. We know that. Israel knows that. But here's the question that Jen Psaki and no one else seems to be asking, folks. Why were the AP and Al Jazeera sharing office space with Hamas, a terrorist organization? What's the answer to that? Now, is it because they want access? Hey, if we are in close proximity to Hamas, they will allow us to operate freely inside Gaza. Who knows? Could that be the reason? All I know is this: they were knowingly sharing office space with Hamas. So just to get the facts straight, and there's a lot of facts that have been misrepresented, to say the least, since Monday, since this new war broke out. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's a big story right now, and now you know what really went on. Second thing to keep in mind, an update just on the casualty numbers and the carnage statistics, I guess you would say. I hate to define it that way. As I mentioned at the top, at least 2,300 rockets launched from Gaza at cities in Israel. Southern Israel, of course, has borne the brunt of this. Places like Sderot, Ashkelon, which are not far from that Gaza border. But as we've been telling you here in the newscast throughout the week, folks, new volume, I guess you would say, a new level in terms of volume. Hundreds of these rockets being launched at once by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, these two Iranian proxies operating in Gaza. So that is a big advance for Hamas, quite frankly, a step up in their capabilities, bigger payloads these rockets are carrying as well. So Tel Aviv barraged, and I hate to say it, as I come to you again, it's nearly midnight in Israel. Perhaps there is another barrage headed for central Israel as I speak, God forbid. Today in Ramat Gan, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv, one Israeli man was killed in one of these strikes. That brings the total to 11 Israelis killed, including one soldier, over 130 Palestinians reportedly killed. The Israel Defense Forces says that the vast majority of these Palestinians were members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, number one. Number two, were used as, there were innocent civilians killed as well, which we hate to see, of course. But these were people, God bless them, who were used as human shields by Hamas and by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who intentionally use women, children, and the elderly, innocent civilians, as human shields, and who intentionally place rocket launchers in densely populated civilian areas because they know that Israel will not knowingly kill civilians. I mentioned the roof knocking a minute ago, right? That's just one element of what the Israel Defense Forces do. Again, the most humane fighting force in the world today, along with the United States. And I welcome all the comments, the howls of outrage for me saying that. I know they'll come, but that's a fact. So you have the situation of human shields. You also have the situation when it comes to Palestinian casualties of Hamas firing, again, thousands of rockets, but hundreds of those rockets, folks, have not left Gaza. They have dropped, they have fallen inside Gaza. They did not reach their intended target, innocent Israeli civilians. They actually fell inside Gaza and killed innocent Palestinian civilians. The greatest enemy of the Palestinian people is not Israel. It's their leadership. It's Hamas, who rules the Gaza Strip with an iron fist and suppresses its own people and quite literally is making their lives miserable, has no regard for Palestinian or Israeli life. And that's the fact. Now, who benefits from all this? A lot of the questions we're getting in the comments are asking how this started. We need to do a deeper dive on that. A lot of people are screaming at me, Sheikh Jarrah and the violence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and atop the Temple Mount earlier this week. That's how it started. Hamas is just responding to Israeli aggression. We need to do a deeper dive on the newscast. We don't have the time to do it today, perhaps tomorrow, but certainly as the week goes on, because this war looks like it's going to continue. More on that as I close in a minute. But the situation in terms of how it all began, I would argue, folks, that this really began, this latest round, in 2005. What do I mean by that? Well, 2005 was the Gaza disengagement, when Israel pulled every Israeli who was living in Gaza. There were beautiful Israeli communities in northern Gaza for years. Those people were pulled out. Their homes were left. They were evacuated. It was all left for the Palestinians in 2005. Israel, no Israelis were left in Gaza. And Israel actually, and Israeli philanthropists actually left greenhouses behind and said, they encouraged the Palestinians, said, hey, take these greenhouses, agriculture, industry, economy, good luck. It's yours now. So this is not about occupation. I heard someone on CNN International say, isn't the occupation the reason why this is happening? There are no Israelis in Gaza. Hamas, as soon as Israel left in 2005, began almost to the minute firing rockets into Israel. That's what this is all about, folks. By the way, those greenhouses were destroyed and ransacked. But the rockets started in 2005 to a greater degree than they were already coming, really. And they have not stopped since then. As a matter of fact, they have intensified. That's one reason behind what we are seeing right now. The second reason resides in Tehran. It is named the Iranian regime. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are controlled by Iran. That's the bottom line, folks. And if international leaders really want this to stop, the carnage, then they will talk to the Ayatollah in Iran, the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, or his minion Hassan Rouhani, or Javad Zarif, his other minion, and tell them, call off Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They are bought and paid for, these two terror organizations, by the Iranian regime. And again, I ask my commenters who are cheering on Hamas, do you really feel comfortable and feel good about being a pawn and a proxy of Iran? Do you really feel good about that? Because that's exactly what Hamas and Islamic Jihad are. Folks, if you want to see this stop like I do, the answer lies in Tehran. And again, I mentioned this on the newscast the other day. You can check all of our newscasts, all of our coverage of this war out in our archives here on YouTube. This is a dry run, I believe. I hate to use that term, but Iran is testing the waters. It's got that ring of fire surrounding Israel on all sides, whether it's Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shia militias to the east, the Houthis in Yemen to the south. A ring of fire surrounding Israel. One day, Iran plans to activate that ring. This is kind of testing the waters. They're seeing, okay, what can we get away with? How much damage can Hamas and Islamic Jihad cause? How will the Israeli government, Israeli civilians, the Israeli military, the international community react to this? Because one day, Iran will unleash Hezbollah, which wields some 150,000 rockets and missiles aimed at every inch of Israel. If you think what's happening right now is bad, folks, and oh, it's bad, and Hamas is a lethal problem and a lethal threat to Israel's security and the security of the region as a whole, you ain't seen nothing yet, because Hezbollah is a whole other level of evil and lethal capabilities. So keep this situation in your prayers for sure. As the weekend goes on, we will probably come to you once again tomorrow, Sunday, May 16th. There seems to be no end in sight. There was talk of a potential ceasefire, but Hamas keeps firing rockets. And Israel says, look, there are things we want to accomplish before we agree to a ceasefire, and rightfully so. We want to weaken Hamas to a degree that they will not pose any sort of serious threat for a long time. So still some talk of a potential ground invasion of Gaza. Everyone would love to see a ceasefire and see the fighting end, of course. But again, that hinges on Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and their masters in Tehran. Folks, we are keeping a close eye on it for you again. Remember, you can also follow me at Erick Stakelbeck on Facebook and Twitter. That's at Erick Stakelbeck, and Erick.Stakelbeck at Erick.Stakelbeck on Instagram. We're bringing you updates there as well. Until tomorrow, pray for this situation, folks. Continue to lift up Israel. Continue to lift up the Palestinians who are being used and abused by their leadership. I'm talking about Hamas. Hey, God Almighty still sits on the throne. He's sovereign over this situation. Keep praying until probably tomorrow. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.